Welcome back. Today we will unravel the mystery of the morning milk, a case that has kept us intrigued from the very start. Stay with us till the end as we work together to uncover the truth behind this enigma. The village of St. Mary Mead was, as always, a picture of tranquility, cobbled streets, flower-lined gardens, and the occasional murmur of the village clock marking the hour. Yet, this morning something was amiss. A bottle of milk, perfectly placed on the doorstep of Evelyn Thorn's cottage, appeared out of nowhere, untouched and inexplicably fresh. No note. No sign of the deliverer, just a simple, innocent bottle. Or so it seemed. But Miss Marple, from her quiet corner of the village, had seen enough to know that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The air felt thick, like a secret was waiting to be whispered. And as Evelyn glanced uneasily at the bottle, a creeping suspicion began to settle in her chest. The feeling that this small, innocent delivery was anything but. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Visitor. The Village of St. Mary Mead was, as it always had been, a place of quiet charm. A place where nothing particularly exciting ever happened, and that was exactly how the villagers liked it. The cobblestone streets were always neat, the gardens full of well-tended flowers, and the clock tower rang the hour in steady intervals, punctuating the peaceful rhythm of village life. But even in a place like St. Mary Mead, where the mundane was cherished, and the extraordinary seemed a distant dream, there were times when the ordinary was not quite as it seemed. It was late afternoon, and Miss Marple was sitting in her usual chair by the window of her cottage, a steaming cup of tea cradled between her hands. The air outside was crisp, the scent of fallen leaves mixing with the earthy smell of damp soil. She had always been someone who found comfort in the quiet, in the slow-turning wheels of everyday life, where nothing moved too fast and nothing was too unpredictable. She liked to observe, to take her time, and yet, despite her reputation as the quiet village spinster, she had always known that beneath the calm surface of life, mysteries waited to be uncovered. It was during one of these rare moments of stillness, as Miss Marple watched a bird flit by the window, that she heard it, a knock on the door, sharp and insistent. The sound startled her slightly, and she set her cup down, the porcelain making a soft clink against the saucer. "Now who could that be?" she muttered to herself, rising from her chair and adjusting her spectacles. She had learned long ago that nothing was ever quite as simple as it appeared, and the knock, though it had no urgency, was not the usual call for a chat or an afternoon tea. She opened the door, and standing before her was a young woman, elegantly dressed, but with a look of nervousness about her. She was in her late 20s perhaps, her face pale, but with a hint of defiance that told Miss Marple she wasn't the type to ask for help easily. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice soft, but there was an edge of anxiety to it. "I'm sorry to bother you, Miss Marple." "My name is Evelyn Thorn." Miss Marple regarded her closely, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She'd never met Evelyn Thorn before, but there was something in the woman's demeanor that felt off. It wasn't her clothing, which was perfectly respectable, nor her appearance, which was pleasant though slightly strained. It was the way she stood, as though something were weighing heavily on her. Something that didn't quite belong to the peaceful, idyllic village Miss Marple knew so well. "Please, come in," Miss Marple said, stepping aside to let Evelyn enter. "What can I help you with, my dear?" Evelyn entered, her heels clicking lightly on the stone floor. She had the look of someone who was trying very hard to maintain composure. But Miss Marple had seen enough to know when someone was trying to mask their fear and Evelyn was no exception. The two women sat down in Miss Marple's cozy sitting room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Evelyn seemed to hesitate for a moment, choosing her words carefully, as if she wasn't sure where to begin. I need your help, Miss Marple, she began, her voice wavering just a little. I've been receiving something strange, something that I can't explain. Miss Marple's interest piqued at once, but she kept her expression calm, waiting for Evelyn to continue. You see, Evelyn continued, glancing nervously out the window as though expecting someone to appear. I've been receiving deliveries. Milk. Every morning. Without fail. A small bottle left on my doorstep, exactly at 6 a.m. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, but her face remained composed. Milk? She repeated, her voice steady. And you've no idea who's leaving it? Evelyn shook her head quickly. No, Miss Marple. I've never ordered it, and it's always fresh. But there's something strange about it, the smell. It's not quite right. Almost like... She paused, as though gathering her thoughts. Almost like it's been mixed with something, but I can't tell what. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. That is peculiar indeed, she murmured. And you've mentioned this to no one else? Evelyn hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the door again. I've told no one. I didn't want to make a fuss, but then, last night I found something else. Another note, left along with the milk. It was addressed to me, but it didn't say much. Just a few words. The milk is a gift. You will need it soon. Miss Marple's mind began to turn, the cogs of suspicion already beginning to turn. A note, you say? And you didn't recognize the handwriting? No, Evelyn replied quickly. It was very neat, but unfamiliar. Miss Marple sat back, considering the situation. You say that the milk is fresh each time, and yet you've never ordered it? Has anyone else in the village experienced anything similar? Evelyn shook her head. No one I've spoken to. But I fear it's more than just a simple delivery. I have the feeling someone is watching me. Following me, perhaps. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet understanding. I see, she said softly. It seems we have ourselves a mystery. Evelyn looked at her, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. You can help me, can't you? Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, a subtle smile of quiet confidence playing in the corners of her mouth. Of course, my dear. I believe we'll have to dig a little deeper to find the answers you seek, but I'll make sure we uncover the truth. No one in St. Mary Mead escapes Miss Marple's watchful eye for long. Evelyn seemed to relax a little, but there was still that underlying tension in her posture. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know who else to turn to. Miss Marple nodded. You've come to the right place. Now tell me, does anyone else have a reason to cause you harm? Any enemies, perhaps, or old acquaintances with ill intentions? Evelyn looked away for a moment, her fingers twitching in her lap. There is one person, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't think he's the one leaving the milk. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. Tell me about him. As Evelyn shared her story, the mystery of the milk and the strange note began to take shape in Miss Marple's mind. There were things Evelyn was still hiding, things she wasn't yet ready to confront. But Miss Marple knew better than to rush. In her experience, the most intricate mysteries were often the ones where the answers lay hidden beneath layers of truth, half-truths, and silence. And so, Miss Marple listened, as she always did, patiently, quietly, and with great attention to detail. for she knew that the answers were out there. It was simply a matter of finding them, one step at a time. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Miss Marple's mind raced. The game had begun. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The next morning, the village at St. Mary Mead awoke to the usual chorus of birdsong and the soft murmur of everyday life. The day was crisp and clear with sunlight filtering through the trees and casting golden patterns across the cobbled streets. But for Miss Marple, the village's tranquility held a certain tension, a lingering sense that something was amiss. She had agreed to help Evelyn, and in doing so, she had already sensed that the case would prove more complicated than it appeared at first glance. Miss Marple made her way to the village square, her steps light but deliberate. The quiet, familiar faces of the villagers greeted her with polite nods as she passed, but she barely noticed them. Her thoughts were on Evelyn, who had become, for all intents and purposes, the center of this mystery. Miss Marple had been intrigued by the young woman's story, but there was something she hadn't yet shared. Evelyn's fear was palpable, but it was not just the strange deliveries of milk that unnerved her. It was something deeper, something from her past that Miss Marple could only begin to guess. Miss Marple had promised to meet Evelyn at the cafe that afternoon. Evelyn had insisted that Miss Marple needed a break, but Miss Marple knew that there was no time to waste. She needed to see the milk bottles for herself and find some clue that would unlock the mystery. She had learned long ago that in her line of work, there was no such thing as a coincidence. Everything had a reason, even the smallest details. As Miss Marple entered the cafe, the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked scones filled the air. Evelyn stood behind the counter, her apron neatly tied and her hands moving with practiced grace as she prepared drinks for the few customers seated at the tables. There was a certain peace to the cafe, and Miss Marple could see that Evelyn had found solace in this new venture. Yet despite the warmth of the cafe, Miss Marple could sense the lingering undercurrent of anxiety in Evelyn's movements. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," Evelyn greeted her, her voice still carrying a slight tremor, though she tried to hide it with a smile. "I've set aside a table for us. Would you like some tea?" "Yes, thank you, Evelyn," Miss Marple replied, offering her a kind smile. She followed Evelyn to a quiet corner near the window where the afternoon sunlight spilled across the table, creating a warm, golden pool of light. As she sat, Miss Marple took in her surroundings. It was the perfect little cafe, cozy with mismatched chairs and antique decor that gave it character. The atmosphere felt light, but the weight of Evelyn's worry still hung in the air. "How are you this afternoon?" Miss Marple asked as she sat down, her voice gentle but probing. "Is everything well with the cafe?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, everything is going well here, but I keep thinking about the milk. About the deliveries. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched." Miss Marple studied her closely, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You mentioned the milk yesterday. Have you seen anything else unusual? Any other strange occurrences?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. I don't know. It's just the milk. Every morning, exactly at 6, a bottle is left in my doorstep. And I can't help but feel that someone is trying to send me a message. Miss Marple nodded, her brow furrowing. "I understand, and what about the note you mentioned?" Evelyn's eyes flickered with unease, but she didn't look away. "The note, it wasn't much. Just those cryptic words. The milk is a gift. You will need it soon. I didn't think much of it at first, but now I can't help but feel like it's leading to something. Something I'm not ready to face. Miss Marple sat back in her chair, her mind working over the details. I see. And have you noticed anything about the milk itself? The bottle, the contents? Evelyn nodded. It always looks fresh. But the smell, it's faint, but it's there. Something medicinal, I think. Almost like it's been mixed with something else, but I can't quite place it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind sharpening. Interesting. And you've not ordered this milk. You have no idea who's leaving it. No, Evelyn replied firmly. I've never ordered it. And no one in the village has mentioned anything about deliveries either. It's as if it just appears every morning. Very well, Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. I will need to see one of these bottles for myself. I have a feeling there is more to this than meets the eye. After a brief pause, Miss Marple stood and walked with Evelyn to the back of the cafe, where a small storage area was located. There, stacked neatly, was a row of the milk bottles, each one identical in size and shape, with a plain, unmarked label. Miss Marple picked one up carefully, her fingers brushing the cool glass. She held it up to the light, inspecting it closely. The milk inside was a perfect creamy white, but there was something strange about the texture. It was too smooth, almost as if it had been artificially thickened. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. She opened the bottle and sniffed the contents. The faint medicinal odor Evelyn had mentioned lingered, a mixture of herbs and something more chemical. This is unusual, Miss Marple murmured, more to herself than to Evelyn. She took a small sip, her lips pursed as she tasted the milk. There was an odd aftertaste, bitter yet strangely calming. It didn't make sense. Evelyn looked at her, her eyes wide with concern. What is it? Is there something wrong with it? Miss Marple set the bottle down slowly, her mind racing. I'm not certain yet. But this is definitely not ordinary milk, Evelyn. Someone has gone to great lengths to ensure this arrives at your door each morning. Evelyn's hands clenched around the edge of the counter, her anxiety growing. What do you mean? Who would do something like this? Miss Marple turned to face her, her expression calm but resolute. I don't know yet, my dear, but I promise you this. Whoever is behind this is trying to send you a message. We just need to figure out what that message is. As Miss Marple left the cafe, her mind was full of questions. The milk was a carefully orchestrated part of something larger, that much was clear. But what was its purpose? And why Evelyn? Was there something in her past that made her a target? Or was this just a cruel game of someone playing with her fears? As the evening shadows grew longer, Miss Marple's thoughts turned back to the letter, the cryptic message. You will need it soon. What did it mean? What was coming? One thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The mystery was deepening, and Miss Marple would not rest until she had the answers. But for now, she would watch and wait, just as she always did. And in time, the truth would reveal itself. Chapter 3. Meeting the key character. The next few days passed quietly, as the village of St. Merry Mead resumed its peaceful pace. But for Miss Marple, the events surrounding the mysterious milk deliveries and the cryptic note continued to linger in her mind, unraveling like a thread that begged to be pulled. Evelyn had been on edge since their last conversation. Despite the reassurances Miss Marple had given her, the young woman couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something was closing in on her. Miss Marple, ever patient and observant, knew that To truly understand the heart of this mystery, she would need to meet the people connected to Evelyn's past, those who might know something about why she was being targeted. It was late in the afternoon when Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to Evelyn's cottage. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village green, and the cool breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. As she walked the familiar path, Miss Marple reflected on what she had learned so far. The milk, the note, Evelyn's growing unease. Everything was tied together, but there were still pieces missing. When she arrived at Evelyn's door, she noticed that the young woman appeared even more anxious than before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she hadn't slept properly, and her movements were jerky, almost as if she were expecting someone, or something, to appear at any moment. "Evelyn," Miss Marple greeted her warmly, though she could sense the tension in the air. "How are you, my dear? Still receiving the milk every morning?" Evelyn nodded, but her voice was tight. "Yes, Miss Marple, every morning at 6 on the dot. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm being watched all the time. And the milk, it's not just the milk, it's everything else. I keep hearing things, footsteps outside my door, whispers in the dark. I'm scared." Ms. Marple stepped inside, her eyes scanning the small cottage. It was neat and tidy, with a sense of calm about it, but Evelyn's unease had unsettled even the comforting atmosphere. Miss Marple had seen this kind of fear before, the kind that grows and grows in the dark corners of the mind until it consumes everything. But she also knew that it could be overcome. "You need to trust me, Evelyn," Miss Marple said, gently taking a seat. "I'm here to help, and together we will get to the bottom of this." Evelyn took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she sat down opposite Miss Marple. "There's something else, Miss Marple. Someone came to see me a few days ago. A man. I didn't recognize him, but he seemed to know everything about me. Everything." Miss Marple's interest was immediately piqued. "A man, you say? Did he give you his name?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, he only said his name was Gregory. He was tall, dark-haired. He had this air about him like he was familiar with everything. He said he had been watching me for a long time and that I should be careful. That's when I started feeling even more afraid. Who is he, Miss Marple? What does he want from me?" "Gregory," Miss Marple repeated, mulling over the name. "Familiar, you say. Tell me, Evelyn, did he mention anything about your family? About the past?" Evelyn's face paled. "He did. He said my family owed him something, that the past wasn't finished, that I had something that belonged to him I didn't understand. What could I possibly owe him? My parents are gone, and they never mentioned anything like that. He made it sound like he had some claim on me or on something I had." Miss Marple's mind began to race. A man named Gregory, claiming that Evelyn owed him something from the past. It was more than just the milk deliveries now. There was a deeper connection, something hidden in Evelyn's past that was now surfacing. "You're sure he didn't mention how he knew about your family?" Miss Marple pressed, her voice calm but insistent. "No," Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "He just kept repeating that I had something he wanted, and then he left, like nothing had happened." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I see. Gregory? A name I'm not familiar with, but certainly someone who is tied to your past in some way. If he's been watching you, he must have an interest in something you've inherited, or perhaps something your family had." Evelyn bit her lip, the fear rising again. "I don't know what to do, Miss Marple. If he's involved in all this, I'm not sure I can handle it. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on Evelyn's. You're stronger than you think, my dear. I believe we're getting closer to understanding what's really going on, but we'll need to dig into your family's history. There's something about your inheritance that's been hidden, and I suspect Gregory is at the center of it. Evelyn's eyes widened. My inheritance? But I don't have much. My parents left me this cottage and some old family heirlooms. That's all. There's no fortune waiting for me. Miss Marple stood up, her expression calm but determined. I suspect it's not the material wealth that Gregory is after, Evelyn. It's something far more valuable, something tied to your family's past, something buried for a reason. As Miss Marple left Evelyn's cottage, her thoughts were clear and focused. The man named Gregory was no ordinary figure. He was part of something much larger, a legacy that Evelyn had inherited whether she knew it or not. But what could it be? What had her family been involved in? Miss Marple had a feeling that the key to solving the mystery wasn't just in the milk deliveries or the cryptic note. It was in Gregory's hidden motives and in the shadows of Evelyn's past. The investigation was now officially underway, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Chapter 4. Investigation begins. The next few days were filled with quiet deliberation as Miss Marple methodically pieced together the clues Evelyn had provided. There was a sense of urgency that had shifted in the air, the faintest whisper of danger that hadn't been there before. Miss Marple's mind was sharp, and she knew better than to rush headlong into a case without careful planning. But with every passing hour, she could feel the weight of something hidden, something dangerous, drawing closer. St. Mary Mead, in all its simplicity, had a way of keeping secrets. Miss Marple had learned long ago that beneath its charming exterior, there were stories, whispered secrets, and forgotten histories that had the power to change the course of lives. And now it seemed it was time for the secrets to surface. Miss Marple's first stop was the village archives, a small dusty room tucked in the back of the town hall. It was the place where old records, documents, and letters were kept, dusty remnants of the village's past. Mrs. Avery, the village librarian, sat behind the counter flipping through a thick ledger. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her glasses perched low on her nose. Miss Marple, Mrs. Avery greeted her warmly, setting the ledger aside. What brings you here today? I'm looking for information, Miss Marple replied, her voice thoughtful. Specifically, anything related to the Thorn family. Old records, land deeds, anything that might shed light on their past. Mrs. Avery raised an eyebrow. The Thorn family? I can't say we've had much cause to speak of them in recent years, but I suppose I can help you. The Thorns were once quite prominent in the village, though their name hasn't come up much since the tragedy. Tragedy? Miss Marple inquired, her interest piqued. What kind of tragedy? Mrs. Avery leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Ah, well, that's a tale for another time. Suffice it to say, the Thorn family was very involved in some business dealings many years ago, some of it questionable. There was a lot of talk back then. Their name has been tied to all sorts of unpleasantness. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she listened intently. Unpleasantness, you say? I see. Can you show me where the records are kept? Mrs. Avery stood up and led Miss Marple to a dusty shelf at the back of the room. She reached for a thick, leather-bound ledger and flipped it open, revealing rows of neatly written entries. Here it is, Mrs. Avery said, pointing to a page. the Thorn family's land deeds, and some associated contracts. But I warn you, it's not a pleasant read. Miss Marple examined the records carefully, her eyes scanning the names and dates. There was nothing particularly unusual about the documents at first glance. Just standard transactions and legal agreements. But as she flipped through the pages, one name stood out. Gregory. Gregory? Miss Marple repeated softly, her eyes fixed on the signature. Who is he? Mrs. Avery glanced at the page, her face shadowed with a flicker of discomfort. Ah, yes, Gregory. He was a business associate of Joseph Thorn, Evelyn's father. They had some dealings together, land investments as I recall. But it was a long time ago. Too long. I'm surprised anyone would remember Gregory now. Miss Marple leaned closer, her fingers tracing the name. There was something in the way it appeared, so casually, so easily, like it was a matter of fact. And yet, this was the same name Evelyn had mentioned. This man, Gregory, seemed to be at the center of it all. Do you have anything else on Gregory? Any mention of him in other records? Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Avery hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the stacks of documents. There might be some mention of him in the old journals, though I'm not sure if they're relevant. I would like to see them, Miss Marple said, her voice firm but gentle. Every detail counts. Later that day, Miss Marple was back in her cottage, reviewing the records Mrs. Avery had provided. She pored over them carefully, looking for any hint that would explain Gregory's connection to the Thorn family. And to Evelyn. It wasn't long before she found it. In the margins of one of the documents, barely legible, was a cryptic note written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. Gregory's claim to the land is final. The Thorn legacy will remain intact. No one can stop it. The words jumped out at her. This wasn't just a matter of business transactions. There was something darker at play, something far more personal. And then it hit her. Gregory wasn't just a business partner. He had some claim over the Thorn family. And he was trying to force that claim onto Evelyn. Miss Marple needed more information. She had learned enough to know that Gregory's involvement in the Thorn family's affairs wasn't just a passing connection. But what did he want from Evelyn? What was he trying to take from her? The next day, Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to the old mill, once the heart of the Thorn family's wealth. Now abandoned and overgrown with ivy, it stood as a reminder of a past long gone. But Miss Marple knew that the answers she sought might lie within its crumbling walls. She couldn't help but feel that whatever Gregory was after, it had something to do with this place. As she made her way to the mill, her mind raced with possibilities. She could feel the weight of the mystery growing, the threads connecting in ways she hadn't yet fully understood. The milk deliveries, the cryptic note, and now Gregory's claim to the Thorn legacy, all pointed towards something far more intricate than she'd initially thought. Miss Marple reached the mill, its heavy wooden doors creaking as she pushed them open. The air inside was musty and stale, but there was something else, something familiar about it. As she stepped inside, she heard a faint rustling from the back of the building. A shadow moved across the floor, and Miss Marple's hand instinctively reached for the walking stick she always carried. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice steady. For a moment, there was silence. Then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Gregory. The game had begun. Miss Marple knew she had only just uncovered the surface of this mystery, and Gregory was the key. As he stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with recognition and something else, something darker. "I see you found your way here, Miss Marple," Gregory said, his voice low and gravelly. "But you're too late. The Thorn legacy is mine." Miss Marple stood her ground, her expression calm, but her mind working at lightning speed. "We'll see about that, Mr. Gregory. The game is far from over." The investigation had truly begun, and Miss Marple knew that the stakes were higher than she had anticipated. Gregory's claims, Evelyn's past, and the mysterious milk were all tied together in ways she was only beginning to understand. But Miss Marple was determined to uncover the truth, piece by piece, no matter how deep the web of deceit went. Chapter 5. New Revelations. The encounter with Gregory had been unsettling, to say the least. Miss Marple could sense the man's smug confidence, the way he tried to assert control with his dark presence in the old mill. But there was one thing that Miss Marple knew better than anyone. People like Gregory, those who thought they had all the answers, rarely saw the twists in the path ahead. She knew that she had to stay focused, to see through the layers of this mystery and uncover the truth. The moment Gregory left, Miss Marple stood still for a few minutes, her eyes scanning the room. The dust, the half-broken machinery, the old beams, it all seemed to hold a long-forgotten story. Something had happened here, something that tied Gregory, the Thorn family, and Evelyn together. But what? And why had Gregory come to the village now, after all these years? She knew one thing. There was more to Gregory's claim than just land and inheritance. There was something buried in the past, something he was desperate to possess. As she stepped out of the mill, she made her way back to her cottage, her thoughts racing. The next day, as the village awoke to its usual rhythm, Miss Marple returned to the task at hand. Evelyn had mentioned a few details that seemed insignificant at first: her family's old business dealings, her parents' reluctance to talk about certain things. Perhaps it was time to revisit those memories. The answer, Miss Marple was sure, lay hidden in the past. Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to Mrs. Middleton, an elderly friend who had known Evelyn's family for many years. Mrs. Middleton had always been one of the most reliable sources of information in the village. Her sharp mind and encyclopedic knowledge of local history unmatched. She was the perfect person to help uncover the details that Evelyn might not even remember herself. As Miss Marple approached Mrs. Middleton's cottage, the warm glow of the afternoon sun reflected off the thatched roof, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the open window. Mrs. Middleton was always cooking something, even if it was just for herself. Miss Marple knocked softly at the door, and it swung open almost immediately. "Miss Marple!" Mrs. Middleton greeted her with a smile. Come in, come in." "I was just about to sit down for tea. I'll get an extra cup." "Thank you, Mrs. Middleton," Miss Marple replied, stepping inside. "I'm afraid I need to ask you about something more than just tea today." Mrs. Middleton raised an eyebrow as she set the kettle on the stove. "What's this? More mysteries?" "You do seem to have a knack for them, Miss Marple. Is it Evelyn Thorn you're asking about?" Miss Marple nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, Evelyn. There's something I need to understand about her family's history, and I think you might know something about it." Mrs. Middleton's face grew serious, and she gestured for Miss Marple to sit. "I'm not sure I know much more than what I've already told you, but I'll tell you what I remember. Evelyn's family was well known around here, though they kept to themselves. They were involved in business, of course, but there were always rumors about their dealings. There was one person who always seemed to come and go, a man named Gregory. I don't know much about him, but I know that he was a part of the Thorn family's life many years ago." "Gregory," Miss Marple repeated. "The same Gregory who has recently come to the village." "Yes," Mrs. Middleton replied, her voice lowering. "He was... well, how should I put this? He wasn't a person you would invite into your home unless you had no other choice. There was always something about him that made people uncomfortable, but he was always there, involved in their business, whispers mostly, a shadow. And then, when the Thorn family fell apart, he disappeared. At least, that's what I thought. I didn't expect him to come back." Miss Marple leaned forward, her fingers lightly tapping on the arm of her chair. "What happened to the Thorn family? You say they fell apart. What do you mean by that?" Mrs. Middleton paused for a moment, her eyes flicking to the window as though she were searching for the right words. "Well, it's all tied up in the land, you see. The Thorn family owned quite a bit of it, including the mill. They made their money from it, but there were rumors that they were involved in some shady dealings with other people, investments that went wrong, things hidden from the authorities. When Evelyn's parents passed, there was talk of an inheritance, a large sum of money tied to some business dealings. But it wasn't just money they were after. There was something more, something tied to the land itself." Ms. Marple's mind raced as she processed this information. "So, Gregory was involved in these dealings?" "Yes," Mrs. Middleton confirmed. "He was close to Joseph Thorn, Evelyn's father. I don't know exactly what they did, but it was all business and it was all very secretive. And after Joseph died, everything changed. The family business crumbled and Gregory vanished. No one ever heard from him again." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Until now." Mrs. Middleton nodded slowly. "Yes, until now." Miss Marple left Mrs. Middleton's cottage with a clearer sense of what she was dealing with. Gregory wasn't just a random figure from the past. He had been deeply embedded in the Thorn family's business dealings. The land, the mill, the inheritance. It all seemed to be connected to something larger, something far more sinister than a simple financial dispute. But what was it? What had been hidden all those years ago? And why had Gregory returned now after all this time? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but there was still much Miss Marple needed to uncover. The connection between Gregory, Evelyn's family, and the land was becoming clearer. But the truth was still elusive, just out of reach. And Miss Marple knew that this mystery was far from over. Later that evening, Miss Marple sat in her study, carefully examining the documents from the village archives. The land deeds, the business contracts, the cryptic note. Each one was a clue, a piece of the larger picture. She had a feeling that Gregory was more than just a businessman. There was something much darker behind his involvement with the Thorn family. But what was it? And why had he chosen Evelyn as his target? The answers, Miss Marple was certain, were hidden somewhere in the past. All she needed was the right thread to pull. Chapter 6. The Villain's Shadow. The night settled in quickly over St. Mary Mead, the cold breeze sweeping through the village streets as the street lamps flickered to life, casting their soft glow across the cobbled paths. Inside her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, deep in thought, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest of her chair. She had gathered many pieces of the puzzle, but there were still gaps in her understanding. The mystery surrounding Evelyn, Gregory, and the Thorn family's past seemed to be entwined with more secrets than even she had anticipated. And now, Miss Marple realized, the time had come to confront the source of the darkness, Gregory himself. It was clear that Gregory had returned to claim something, perhaps the Thorn family's legacy or something more elusive. But he was not a man who would simply walk into the village and announce his intentions. No, Gregory was far more cunning than that. His reappearance had been calculated. His involvement in the Thorn family's past, though veiled in secrecy, held the key to everything. The following morning, as Miss Marple walked through the village square, her mind worked furiously. She had been patient, taking the time to gather the facts, but now it was time to take action. Evelyn, despite her progress, was still deeply affected by the constant tension Gregory's presence had brought to her life. She was a woman on the edge, unable to fully embrace her future until this threat was eradicated once and for all. Miss Marple had made up her mind. She would find Gregory, face him directly, and demand the truth. It was time to lay everything bare. Miss Marple's first stop was the mill. She had returned several times now, always with the intention of uncovering more about the land, the old business dealings, and whatever secrets the Thorn family had left behind. The place seemed untouched by time, its wooden beams weathered and its machinery silent. It was a relic of a past that had slipped into obscurity, but for Miss Marple, the answers she sought were buried deep within these walls. She entered the building once again, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The silence was overwhelming. She moved cautiously, running her fingers along the dusty surfaces of old equipment, her eyes searching every nook and cranny for something, anything, that might explain Gregory's involvement. Her gaze shifted to the far corner of the room where an old trunk stood, covered in layers of dust. It was not unusual for old buildings like this to store forgotten items in such places, but something about this particular trunk caught Miss Marple's attention. There was a familiarity to it, a sense that it might hold something crucial to the puzzle. Miss Marple approached it carefully, her curiosity piqued. The trunk was locked, but she had an inkling that it would open with little resistance. After a few moments of searching the nearby shelves, Miss Marple found a rusty key hidden in a drawer beneath a stack of old documents. She inserted it into the lock and turned, the trunk creaking open with a groan. Inside, Miss Marple found a collection of old papers, ledgers, contracts, and letters. She began sifting through them, her eyes scanning the neatly written pages for anything that might tie Gregory to the Thorn family's financial troubles. And there it was, hidden amidst the pile of dusty papers, a letter. It was old, yellowed with age, but it was still legible. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Gregory. Miss Marple read the letter carefully, her heart beating faster as she pieced the words together. Joseph, I'm willing to overlook the terms we discussed, but only if you agree to one final condition. The land you're so eager to keep will be mine, in full. I've helped you build this business, and it's time I took what's mine. The Thorns owe me. I'll be collecting soon, and if you don't comply, the consequences will be dire. Gregory. The words sent a chill through Miss Marple. This wasn't just a matter of business, it was a threat, a power play. Gregory had used Joseph Thorn's desperation to secure control over something far more valuable than money or land. Miss Marple's mind raced as she considered the implications of the letter. The Thorn family's wealth, their business, these were mere pawns in Gregory's game. But what did he want now? Why had he returned after all these years? The answer, Miss Marple suspected, lay with Evelyn. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple paid another visit to Evelyn. She had to share her findings, and she had a feeling that Evelyn would be ready to face whatever came next. The cafe was bustling as usual, the air rich with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of conversation. Evelyn was behind the counter, her smile warm as she noticed Miss Marple entering. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," she greeted her, though there was still a flicker of concern in her eyes. "You're here to see me again, aren't you? Have you learned anything new?" Miss Marple nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke. "Yes, my dear, I've found something important. I visited the old mill again, and I've uncovered some of your family's past, specifically Gregory's involvement." Evelyn's face paled, and she set down the cup she'd been holding. "Gregory," she whispered. "What do you mean? What did you find?" Miss Marple pulled out the letter from her bag and handed it to Evelyn. "This letter was written by Gregory himself many years ago. It seems your father, Joseph Thorn, was heavily involved in some kind of agreement with Gregory. But it wasn't just business. Gregory was securing something more, a claim over the land, over your family's legacy." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she read the letter, her face contorted with confusion and fear. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would Gregory do this? Why come back now?" Miss Marple sighed, her expression thoughtful. "I believe Gregory's return is no coincidence. He has a claim over something your father left behind, a legacy, or perhaps something hidden within the land itself. And he's come back to take what he believes is rightfully his." Evelyn's eyes widened in realization. "So he's been after my family's wealth all along? After everything that's happened, he still wants it?" Miss Marple nodded. "Exactly. And he's not going to stop until he gets it. He's already tried to manipulate the situation. But we will stop him, Evelyn. You've already taken the first step by facing him. Now, we must make sure he cannot get what he wants." Miss Marple's words hung in the air as Evelyn processed the information. There was fear in her eyes, but also a newfound determination. The weight of her past, of her family's legacy, was now clear to her. She would not let Gregory claim what was not his, and she would not be intimidated by the shadows of the past any longer. As the day drew to a close, Miss Marple felt a sense of resolution settling over her. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and soon Gregory's game would be exposed for what it truly was. There was no room for his deceit and manipulation in this village. Miss Marple would see to that. The game was far from over, but the stakes had just gotten much higher, and Miss Marple would ensure that the truth came to light no matter the cost. Chapter 7. The First Confrontation. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the windows of Miss Marple's cottage, casting long shadows across the room. She sat in her favorite chair by the fire, her fingers gently tapping the edge of her teacup. There was an unsettling quiet in the air, a stillness that Miss Marple had come to recognize as the calm before a storm. She had learned long ago that when mysteries were afoot, the atmosphere always seemed to hold its breath before the truth was revealed. Her mind was focused on Gregory. The pieces were coming together, and now it was time to confront him. The letters she had uncovered, the land deals, the cryptic note left with the milk. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Gregory had been after something much more than just money or land. He wanted control. Control over Evelyn's family legacy, over the land, and over everything tied to it. Miss Marple knew that Gregory wouldn't just walk into the village and announce his intentions. No, he was too clever for that. But she also knew that he would not back down once he realized that someone was onto him. This confrontation, she thought, would be the pivotal moment in unraveling the truth. Miss Marple arrived at the mill early the next morning. The air was cool, a light mist hanging over the village as the sun began to rise. She walked with purpose, her steps deliberate and confident. The mill stood before her, its towering structure casting a shadow over the land. To anyone else, it might have seemed like just another building in the village. But to Miss Marple, it was a key piece of the puzzle. This place held the answers, the secrets of the Thorn family's past, and it was time to lay them bare. She pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and rusted machinery filling the air. The mill was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Gregory's presence. But there was no one here, at least not yet. She waited. It wasn't long before the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, slow and deliberate. Miss Marple straightened, her senses sharpened as she prepared for the confrontation she had been expecting. The figure that emerged from the shadows was unmistakable. Gregory. He was tall, his features sharp and angular, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His posture was confident, almost predatory, as though he owned this place. And for all Miss Marple knew, he might very well have claimed it in some quiet, unspoken way. His gaze swept over the room before it landed on Miss Marple, a brief flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Miss Marple," Gregory said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Miss Marple regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable. "I knew you'd be here," she replied, her voice steady. "I've been waiting for you." "Gregory, there are a few things we need to discuss." He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Discuss? I think you already know what this is about, don't you? You've been snooping around in places that you have no business being." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, but her demeanor remained calm. "I'm simply following the threads, Gregory, and I've found quite a few that lead directly to you. You've been involved in the Thorn family's business for years, haven't you? You've been pulling strings, making deals in the shadows. But now it seems your little game is coming to an end." Gregory's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're meddling in matters that don't concern you, Miss Marple. The Thorns owe me, and I've come to collect what's mine." Miss Marple's voice remained calm, though there was a steeliness to it now. "The Thorn family's legacy is not yours to claim, Gregory. And Evelyn has no obligation to you, no matter what you believe. You're not just after money, you're after control, and you're willing to do anything to get it, but you won't succeed." Gregory took a step forward, his face dark with anger. "You think you can stop me? You think you're clever, don't you? Well, you're just a nosy old woman who doesn't know her place. This is bigger than you, Miss Marple. You're out of your depth." Miss Marple stood her ground, her eyes never leaving his. "I've dealt with people like you before, Gregory. People who think they can control others with threats, with power, with lies. But the truth always comes to light. And when it does, people like you are left with nothing." Gregory's lips curled into a sneer, his eyes flashing with malice. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you've figured it all out, but you haven't. You have no idea what's really at stake. The Thorn family's legacy, Evelyn's inheritance, it's all mine, and I'll stop at nothing to claim it." The tension in the air was thick, the room charged with the unspoken threat of violence. Miss Marple could feel it, the shifting undercurrent of Gregory's rage. But she remained calm, her thoughts clear. She had confronted people like him before, people who thought they could intimidate, who used their power and influence to bend others to their will. but she had never been one to back down. "Gregory," Miss Marple said softly, her voice steady but firm, "you've been hiding behind shadows for too long. It's time to face the truth. The Thorn family's past may have been filled with secrets, but those secrets belong to Evelyn now. She is free from your grasp, and you won't get away with this." Gregory's face twisted with fury, but just as he opened his mouth to retort, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Miss Marple turned her gaze sharp as she saw Evelyn standing at the doorway, her face pale but resolute. "Evelyn," Miss Marple said quietly, a small but reassuring smile on her face, "I believe it's time for us to end this." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Gregory, I'm not afraid of you anymore. I know what you've done, and I won't let you take what isn't yours." Gregory's eyes flickered with something close to panic, but he quickly masked it with a forced smirk. "You think you've won, but you're just a pawn in this game, Evelyn. You always have been." Miss Marple's sharp gaze never left Gregory. "No, Gregory," she said, her voice calm yet unyielding. "It's you who's been playing a losing game from the start." The silence that followed was deafening, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Miss Marple could feel the weight of the moment. The confrontation was far from over, but it had shifted in their favor. Gregory had underestimated them, and now the truth would come to light. Miss Marple turned to Evelyn, her eyes steady and sure. "You don't have to worry anymore, Evelyn. This is the beginning of the end for him." As Gregory turned to leave, his face contorted with rage and frustration, Miss Marple's voice rang out once more. "It's over, Gregory. The truth has found its way into the light, and there's no going back." As Gregory stormed out of the mill, Miss Marple and Evelyn stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the confrontation sinking in. The tension had broken, but Miss Marple knew the final chapter of this mystery was yet to be written. They had gained the upper hand, but the game was still in motion. And Miss Marple knew one thing for certain. It was only a matter of time before Gregory's web of deceit unraveled completely. Chapter 8. Deeper Investigation. The morning following their confrontation with Gregory, a heavy mist hung in the air, shrouding Saint Mary Mead in a thick veil of silence. The village, usually so full of life, seemed to be holding its breath, as though the events of the previous day had set something in motion that could not be undone. Miss Marple had no intention of waiting for things to unfold on their own. She had a reputation for thoroughness, and today she would dig deeper into the mystery than ever before. Evelyn, though her nerves were still frayed from the tense encounter with Gregory, had agreed to let Miss Marple continue the investigation. She knew now that she had to face the full extent of her family's secrets, however uncomfortable it might be. She had already taken the first step in freeing herself from Gregory's grip. The next step was to understand exactly what he was after, and why. Miss Marple's first stop was the village archives. Mrs. Avery, the village librarian, greeted her with a mixture of curiosity and concern as she entered the small, dusty room. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and ink, the walls lined with shelves of forgotten records. Mrs. Avery had been a silent witness to many of Saint Mary Mead's secrets over the years, and Miss Marple knew that the village librarian might hold the key to uncovering more about Gregory and the Thorn family's tangled past. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Avery said as she adjusted her glasses, "I assume you're here to continue your search for answers about the Thorns?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm and measured. "I'm looking for anything at all." that might shed light on Gregory's involvement in the Thorn family's affairs, the land dealings, the inheritance, the old business relationships, anything that might connect them to Evelyn's family in a way that hasn't been uncovered yet. Mrs. Avery nodded and gestured to the back of the room. Well, you've come to the right place. I've been going through some old records myself lately, trying to make sense of the Thorns' tangled past. It's a long and complicated story, but I'll help you however I can. Miss Marple followed her to a dusty shelf stacked high with ledgers and bound volumes. Mrs. Avery carefully pulled out an old leather-bound book and flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Here it is," she said. "The Thorn family's business dealings from many years ago. It should provide some context about Gregory's involvement. But I warn you, Miss Marple, there are things here that even the most seasoned detectives would be wary of uncovering." Miss Marple took the book from Mrs. Avery, her eyes scanning the pages. The first few entries were nothing out of the ordinary: property transactions, business investments, and legal contracts. But as she flipped through the pages, one name began to surface again and again: Gregory. It seemed that Gregory had been involved in nearly every major transaction that Joseph Thorn had made in the past 2 decades. The two men had shared interest in land acquisition, property development, and agricultural ventures. But there was something more, something that had been carefully hidden. On the next page, Miss Marple found a particular entry that stood out. It was a legal contract dated several years ago, involving a land deal between Joseph Thorn and a mysterious third party, someone who was referred to only as the benefactor. Miss Marple's heart quickened as she read the details. The benefactor was unnamed in the document, but the terms of the agreement were clear. Joseph Thorn had agreed to transfer ownership of several valuable pieces of land in exchange for a future service. The contract was signed by Joseph Thorn and Gregory, with no further details about the benefactor. The words future service echoed in Miss Marple's mind. What did that mean? And why was Gregory involved in a contract that seemed to promise something for the future? A favor, perhaps, or a debt to be repaid? Miss Marple flipped through the next few pages, her mind racing. The connections were becoming clearer. Gregory had not just been involved in business dealings with the Thorns. He had been part of a much larger scheme, one that tied the Thorn family's wealth and legacy to something far more secretive and dangerous. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple decided to pay another visit to the old mill. There was something about the place that lingered in her mind, something she had missed during her earlier visits. The mill wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of the Thorn family's empire. And whatever secrets it held, Miss Marple was determined to uncover them. As she walked through the overgrown paths that led to the mill, Miss Marple could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The land around the mill had been in the Thorn family's possession for generations, but now it seemed abandoned, forgotten. Yet there was still something about the place that felt alive, as if it were waiting for her to discover the truth. She entered the mill again, the wooden doors creaking as she pushed them open. The smell of dampness and rust filled the air, and the silence was oppressive. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room for any clue, any scrap of evidence that might point to Gregory's real intentions. It was then that she noticed it, the small hidden door at the back of the room. It was barely noticeable, covered in dust and hidden behind a stack of old crates. Miss Marple's curiosity piqued. She moved toward it, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She grasped the handle and turned, the door creaking open. Inside, the room was small and dark, but Miss Marple could see a faint outline of something on the floor. She knelt down and cleared the dust away, revealing a large old chest. The lock was rusted, but not broken. Miss Marple took a deep breath and tried the lock. It clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, the chest was filled with papers, old, yellow documents that had clearly been kept for some time. Miss Marple pulled them out one by one, her heart racing with anticipation. As she scanned the first few pages, she realized that these were more than just old records. They were Gregory's personal papers. Miss Marple's eyes widened as she read the first page. It was a letter from Gregory to Joseph Thorn, detailing an arrangement they had made years ago. An arrangement to ensure Gregory's future claim to the land and the Thorn family's wealth. The letter confirmed what Miss Marple had suspected. Gregory had been playing a long game. He had manipulated Joseph Thorn into signing a deal that bound the family's legacy to him. The future service mentioned in the contract was no vague promise. It was Gregory's right to claim everything that was due to him once Joseph's death had cleared the way. Miss Marple carefully folded the letter back into the chest and stood up. She now had the evidence she needed. Gregory wasn't just a business partner. He was the true heir to the Thorn family's wealth and land, and he had been plotting to take control for years. With this revelation, Miss Marple knew that the next step was crucial. She needed to confront Gregory again, armed with the truth. But this time, she would have the upper hand. She would make sure he could no longer hide behind his carefully constructed lies. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together. Gregory's game was over, and Miss Marple would ensure that Evelyn and the legacy of her family were protected once and for all. The final confrontation was drawing near. But for now, Miss Marple had to bide her time. She would continue to watch, to wait until the moment was right, and when it came, Gregory would have nowhere left to hide. Chapter 9. Building Suspense. The days stretched on, their passing almost imperceptible in the quiet rhythm of St. Mary Mead. Yet, for Miss Marple, each moment was filled with purpose. The mystery surrounding Gregory had deepened, and as each new piece of information fell into place, the weight of the case grew heavier. She had uncovered the truth behind Gregory's manipulation of the Thorn family's legacy, but the revelation was only the beginning. The final confrontation was imminent, and Miss Marple could feel the tension rising with every passing day. Evelyn, though more resolute than before, still carried the shadow of fear in her eyes. The milk deliveries had stopped, but the unease remained, gnawing at her. She was no longer the frightened woman who had first come to Miss Marple for help. She had found strength in the knowledge that Miss Marple was on her side, but there was still something that lingered in her heart, a sense that Gregory's presence was not fully eradicated, that he was still watching from the shadows. As the sun began to set one evening, casting long golden shadows across the village, Miss Marple found herself walking towards Evelyn's cafe. The sky had darkened with the promise of rain, and the wind carried the faint scent of earth and coming storm. It was a fitting atmosphere of the evening ahead, for Miss Marple knew that the storm that had been building for weeks would finally come to a head. Inside the cafe, the usual bustle of afternoon tea had settled into a quieter rhythm. Evelyn was behind the counter, serving the last few customers, her movements fluid and purposeful, though her eyes betrayed the fatigue that had built up over the past few days. She glanced up as Miss Marple entered, offering a small, strained smile. "Good evening, Miss Marple." Evelyn greeted her, her voice tinged with both warmth and weariness. "I wasn't sure if you'd come by tonight." "I promised I would," Miss Marple replied, her tone steady. She moved toward her usual spot by the window, her eyes scanning the cafe, watching the soft glow of the lamps reflect off the polished wood. The cafe, which had once felt like a sanctuary for Evelyn, now seemed like a battleground, a place where the past and future collided. Evelyn joined her at the table, her hands wrapping around a cup of tea. "I've been thinking a lot, Miss Marple, about everything that's happened, about Gregory and the milk deliveries, the things he said." She paused, her voice faltering. "He's gone, hasn't he? Surely, we've won. The worst is behind us." Miss Marple watched her carefully, her expression calm but intense. "I wish I could say that, Evelyn. But Gregory isn't the type to simply vanish. People like him always have a plan, always have something hidden. The truth may have come to light, but there's still the matter of what he truly wants, what he's been after all these years." Evelyn bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the table. "You think he's still out there?" "I don't believe he'll leave quietly," Miss Marple said softly, her voice unwavering. "There's something more at play here, something he's not yet finished with." The silence that followed was thick, the weight of Miss Marple's words hanging in the air. Evelyn seemed to shrink slightly under the pressure of the realization. For all of her progress, for all of the courage she had found, it was clear that she was not yet free from the shadow Gregory had cast over her life. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the narrow streets as though urging them forward. The evening seemed a pulse with a nervous energy, the impending storm a reflection of the tension that was now building between them and the final resolution of the case. Miss Marple's mind raced as she sifted through the facts. Gregory had made his move, but his true intentions were still unclear. The land, the contracts, the mysterious future service that Joseph Thorn had promised. These were all pieces of the puzzle, but they didn't yet form a complete picture. What was Gregory really after? Was it simply the land, or was there something more sinister that he was willing to go to any lengths to reclaim? Just as Miss Marple was about to speak again, the door to the cafe opened with a soft chime and a cold draft swept in. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the dim light of the street. The bell above the door jingled again, but it wasn't the sound of the wind that caught Miss Marple's attention. It was the feeling, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The man who entered was tall, his coat lined with the kind of fine material that suggested wealth and refinement. His sharp features were framed by dark, neatly combed hair. He was familiar, though Miss Marple had not seen him in years. It was Gregory. Evelyn stiffened at the sight of him, her eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Miss Marple, however, remained calm, her gaze unwavering as she watched Gregory move through the cafe with the grace of someone who had long ago claimed his place in the world. Gregory approached their table slowly, his eyes scanning the room as though he owned it. When he reached them, he stopped, his gaze locking with Miss Marple's. "Miss Marple," Gregory said smoothly, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I see you've been busy. I had hoped we could finish our conversation from earlier." Miss Marple did not flinch, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. "I'm afraid there's nothing left to discuss, Gregory," she replied evenly. "Your plans have been exposed. It's over." Gregory's smile didn't waver. "You think so? How quaint." His voice lowered slightly, becoming more menacing. "You and I both know that some things are never truly over. The Thorn family owes me, and you've merely scratched the surface of what's at stake. Evelyn is only part of the equation." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes flickering between Miss Marple and Gregory. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. You've taken everything, my family, my home. What more is there? Gregory leaned forward slightly, his eyes dark with a glint of something unsettling. It's not about what I've taken, Evelyn. It's about what I'm owed. And soon, you'll realize just how much is at stake. You can't run from this forever. Miss Marple leaned forward, her expression sharp. What you've been after isn't just land or wealth, is it, Gregory? It's control. Control over the Thorn legacy, and you'll stop at nothing to get it. Gregory chuckled, the sound cold and hollow. You're close, Miss Marple, but there's still so much you don't understand. Just as he spoke, the door opened again, this time with a sudden force, and two figures stepped inside, the police, led by Inspector Craddock. Gregory, Inspector Craddock said in a voice that brooked no argument, it's time to come with us. You're under arrest for your involvement in several criminal activities, including fraud and extortion. Gregory froze for a moment, his expression flickering with anger. But Miss Marple could see the recognition in his eyes, the realization that his time had run out. His carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than he could manage. As Gregory was led out of the cafe, Miss Marple sat back, her mind racing. The storm that had been building for weeks had finally broken. The confrontation with Gregory had been tense, but now there was nothing left for him to hide behind. The truth had emerged, and the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Evelyn, though still shaken, looked at Miss Marple with gratitude. It's over, isn't it? She whispered. Miss Marple smiled gently. Yes, Evelyn, it's over. But remember, this victory belongs to you. You faced the darkness and came through stronger than ever. As Gregory was escorted out of the cafe, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The truth had won, and the village of St. Mary Mead was finally at peace. But Miss Marple knew that there would always be another mystery waiting just around the corner, and when it arrived, she would be ready. Chapter 10. The Final Clue. The days following Gregory's arrest passed in a blur of whispers and relief. St. Mary Mead, ever the quiet village, settled back into its rhythm, the tension of the past weeks gradually fading into the background. Miss Marple could see the change in Evelyn, a newfound peace in her eyes, a steady confidence in her step. Yet, as the village returned to its usual tranquil pace, Miss Marple couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Though Gregory had been taken into custody, the mystery surrounding him, the Thorn family, and their hidden legacy had yet to be fully explained. The land deals, the cryptic letters, and the eerie connection between Gregory and Evelyn's family were only part of the story. Miss Marple's instincts told her that there was still one last piece of the puzzle left to find. As Miss Marple sat by her window one late afternoon, the soft golden light of the setting sun spilling across the room, she mulled over everything she had learned. She knew there was more. There had to be. Gregory's arrest was only the surface of a much deeper mystery, one that reached far beyond land and business dealings. What had driven him to pursue this legacy, this power, with such relentless fervor? What was he really after? It was then that a sudden knock on the door broke her concentration. Miss Marple rose slowly and opened it, her keen eyes immediately catching the anxious look on Evelyn's face. Miss Marple, Evelyn said, her voice strained. There's something I didn't tell you before. Something I should have mentioned earlier, but I was too afraid. I didn't know who to trust. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Come in, my dear, she said, stepping aside to let Evelyn enter. You've been through a great deal, but now, whatever it is, you can tell me. Evelyn sat down in the armchair, her hands trembling slightly. "It's about my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before he died, he made some strange arrangements, documents he kept locked away. I only found out about them after his death. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I think they're connected to everything that's been happening." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "What kind of documents?" Evelyn hesitated before reaching into her bag and pulling out a small weathered envelope. "I found this in one of my father's old drawers, tucked away behind some books. It was sealed, but the writing on the front was unmistakable. It was from Gregory." Miss Marple took the envelope, her fingers moving delicately as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Gregory's neat, precise handwriting. Miss Marple scanned the letter carefully. "Evelyn, you are not the only one who holds the key to the Thorn legacy. Your father made arrangements that you are unaware of. But you will soon learn that everything has a price. The land, the business, and the legacy, all of it comes at a cost. I have waited long enough, and now you must fulfill the promise your father made to me. The time is near. Gregory." Miss Marple's mind raced as she read the letter. The words were as cryptic as ever, but there was something in them that clicked. A detail that had been missing from the pieces of the puzzle. Gregory's return wasn't just about money or control. It was about a promise. A promise that Evelyn's father had made to him long ago. Evelyn's voice broke through Miss Marple's thoughts. "Do you understand, Miss Marple? What does it mean? What is he talking about?" Miss Marple set the letter down on the table, her fingers gently resting on the edge of the paper. "It means your father had a debt to Gregory, one that goes beyond land or money. He made an agreement with Gregory, perhaps not in the way most people would imagine, but one that would secure Gregory's claim to the Thorn family legacy. And now, Gregory has come to collect it." Evelyn's face paled, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But my father never told me about any of this. Why would he keep it from me?" "Because it wasn't meant for you to know," Miss Marple said softly. "Your father was caught up in something that forced him to make that promise. It's clear now that Gregory has been playing a long game, and everything he's done has been to reclaim that promise." Evelyn sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. "But how could I have known? How could I have stopped him?" "You couldn't have," Miss Marple replied, her voice firm yet comforting. "Gregory is a master of manipulation. He doesn't just take what he wants. He makes others believe they owe him. He spent years building this legacy, ensuring that he would be the one to inherit, not just the land, but everything tied to the Thorn family's name." Evelyn looked down at her hands, her fingers entwined tightly in her lap. "So this is it then? It's all for nothing?" Miss Marple's eyes softened as she looked at Evelyn, her voice gentle but filled with a quiet conviction. "Not at all, my dear. It's not over yet. There's still one last clue we need to find. The key to unlocking this mystery for good." Evelyn looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What do we need to do?" Miss Marple's mind was already at work, connecting the dots, revisiting the clues, and sifting through the details. She stood up and moved toward the small desk in the corner of the room where she had kept the records and letters she had collected. She pulled out the documents related to the Thorn family's land dealings, the contracts, the deeds, and the various financial agreements. There, in one of the margins, she noticed something she hadn't before. A symbol. A small, almost imperceptible mark next to the land deeds. It was a faint emblem, almost like a seal, hidden among the other notations. Miss Marple's heart skipped a beat as she examined it more closely. "Here it is," she whispered to herself. Evelyn stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "It's a seal, a symbol. This mark, it's not just part of the land deal, it's the key to everything. This symbol is connected to an old family trust, one that's been hidden for years. And it's that trust that Gregory is after. Not just the land, but the rights to the legacy." The revelation struck Evelyn like a bolt of lightning. For the first time in the whole ordeal, she felt the fog of confusion begin to clear. Miss Marple had always known that there was something more beneath the surface, but now they were so close to uncovering the truth. "The trust," Evelyn repeated, her voice steadying. "It's hidden somewhere." Miss Marple nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, I believe it's hidden within your father's old legal records. The last part of the puzzle, the final piece that Gregory is after." Evelyn looked determined now, her fear replaced with a sense of purpose. "Where do we find it?" Miss Marple gave a soft, knowing smile. "We'll start with your father's study. If the trust is anywhere, it will be there." As Evelyn and Miss Marple prepared to search the study, the air seemed to shift. The pieces were finally falling into place, but the most important clue had yet to be uncovered. The trust, the legacy, the last secret of the Thorn family, locked away for decades, was waiting to be found. And Miss Marple, with her unerring sense of patience and precision, knew that the truth would soon be revealed. The final clue was within their grasp, and with it, the end of this tangled mystery. Chapter 11. The Showdown. The rain had come by the time Miss Marple and Evelyn arrived at the Thorn family estate. The once pristine grounds, now damp and overgrown, seemed to carry the weight of the past. The estate had been abandoned for years, its grandeur faded. But there was still an undeniable sense of history clinging to the crumbling walls. The house, like the family it had housed, stood at the edge of ruin. But it was still standing, just like Evelyn. Miss Marple had made the decision to confront Gregory. It was the only way to truly bring an end to this tangled web of secrets, deceit, and manipulation. Gregory had been playing the long game, using his influence and threats to keep the Thorn legacy in his grasp. But now, with the discovery of the hidden trust and the final clue, Miss Marple was ready. The time for guessing, for patience, had passed. Now it was time for truth. Evelyn, though steadied by Miss Marple's quiet resolve, couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. Her hands clenched at her sides, her body still trembling from the weight of everything she had learned. She had thought her family's past was buried, forgotten. But now it seemed as though it had come back with a vengeance. "Miss Marple," Evelyn said, her voice low, "do you really think we can stop him? After everything he's done?" Miss Marple looked at her with a calm, unwavering gaze. "We already have, my dear. The truth is our weapon now. All we need to do is show Gregory that his game is over." They reached the entrance of the old study, the place where Joseph Thorn had kept his most private papers. It was here that Miss Marple believed the final piece of the puzzle would be found. The trust, the legacy, and Gregory's true intentions were hidden behind these walls, locked away in the heart of the estate. Miss Marple turned the doorknob and it creaked open. The room inside was dimly lit, the furniture covered in layers of dust. The smell of old books and wood filled the air. In the far corner of the room was a large mahogany desk. It was exactly as Miss Marple had imagined it, a place where the power of the past had been carefully tucked away. "Let's begin," Miss Marple said, her voice resolute. As they approached the desk, Miss Marple's eyes immediately landed on a drawer at the far side. It was slightly ajar, almost as though it had been disturbed recently. Her pulse quickened. This was it, the final clue. She opened the drawer fully, pulling out a large leather-bound folder. The title was embossed in gold. The words, Thorn Family Trust, shining brightly despite the years of neglect. "Here it is, Evelyn," Ms. Marple said, handing her the folder. "This is what Gregory has been after all along." Evelyn took the folder, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were several documents, the first of which was a copy of the original trust agreement signed by Joseph Thorn. The terms were clear: the land, the mill, and the Thorn family. Legacy were to be handed over to Gregory upon Joseph's death, under the condition that Gregory provided a future service to the family. The agreement was eerily vague, but there was no mistaking it. The Thorn family was bound to Gregory in ways that Evelyn had never known. "I don't understand," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "What does it all mean? What does Gregory want with the land?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "It's not the land, Evelyn. It's never been about the land. It's about control. Gregory wanted your father's power, his influence, and he thought he could secure it by forcing this agreement. He believed that once Joseph was gone, the Thorn name would fall to him." Evelyn closed the folder, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "And now he's come back to claim what he thinks is his. He's going to try to take everything from me." Miss Marple's eyes were sharp. "Not if we stop him first." The storm outside had grown louder, the wind howling as if the world itself were preparing for the final confrontation. As Miss Marple and Evelyn moved to leave the study, they heard a door creak open from behind them. They turned to find Gregory standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the entrance. His face was grim, his eyes cold with a mixture of anger and something more dangerous, desperation. "You should have stayed away, Miss Marple," Gregory said, his voice low and dangerous. "And you, Evelyn. You should have accepted your place in all this. You've never understood the cost of your family's legacy, but now you will." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the fear that still lingered in her heart. "No, Gregory, I won't let you have this. The legacy is mine now, and I'm not going to let you take it from me." Gregory's eyes flickered with something darker. "You don't have a choice." "It's already too late. The papers are signed, the deals are done. You think a few documents will change that?" "You're a pawn, Evelyn. You always have been." Miss Marple remained silent, her presence unwavering. "It's not too late, Gregory. You've underestimated Evelyn, and you've underestimated me. We've uncovered the truth. Your game is over." Gregory's smile twisted into something bitter, and he took a step forward, his eyes narrowing with intent. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but an old woman who meddles in things that don't concern her." Miss Marple stood her ground, her voice calm but resolute. "I've seen men like you before, Gregory. Men who think they can control others with fear and manipulation. But in the end, the truth always comes to light, and when it does, it has a way of undoing everything you've built." Gregory's expression darkened, but before he could speak again, there was a sudden sound from the hallway. The door to the study opened, and several constables stepped into the room, led by Inspector Craddock. "It's over, Gregory," Inspector Craddock said, his voice firm as he stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. "You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. We've got all the evidence we need. Your game is finished." Gregory's face twisted with rage, but there was no escape. The truth had come crashing down around him, and for all his scheming and manipulation, he had lost. The Thorn legacy, the power he had tried to claim, was no longer his. As the constables moved in to arrest Gregory, Miss Marple turned to Evelyn, who stood frozen, her face a mixture of shock and relief. "It's over, Evelyn," Miss Marple said softly, her voice full of compassion. "You face the darkness and come out on the other side." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, but she stood tall, her voice steady. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't know how I would have done this without you." As the constables led Gregory away, Miss Marple and Evelyn remained in the study, the weight of the moment settling over them. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was a sense of calm, of finality. The mystery was solved, the villain unmasked, and Evelyn's future was now her own. Miss Marple looked out the window at the darkening sky, her heart light with the satisfaction of a job well done. The pieces had fallen into place, and the truth had prevailed. For Evelyn, the journey was just beginning. But for Miss Marple, it was another case closed, another mystery unraveled. And as the storm raged outside, she knew that there would always be another case waiting, another truth to uncover, another shadow to chase. But for now, Saint Mary Mead was at peace. And that, in Miss Marple's world, was enough. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The storm had passed, leaving Saint Mary Mead bathed in the soft golden light of a clear morning. The air was fresh, the earth still damp from the night's downpour, and the village seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the chaos that had gripped it for weeks finally began to fade away. Inside Miss Marple's cottage, a sense of quiet contentment filled the room. The fire had long since gone out, and the faint sound of birds singing outside the window was the only noise that broke the stillness. Miss Marple sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around her teacup, the warmth of the tea seeping into her hands as she gazed out at the peaceful scene before her. The world had been set right again. The mystery had been solved. Gregory was behind bars, his twisted plans unraveled, and Evelyn had finally reclaimed her future. The weight of the past had been lifted, and now there was only the quiet calm of the present. Later that afternoon, Evelyn arrived at Miss Marple's cottage, a small smile playing on her lips. She was different now, calmer, stronger, her once anxious eyes now filled with a sense of purpose. The events of the past few weeks had been harrowing, but they had shaped her in a way that Miss Marple knew would last a lifetime. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," Evelyn said, her voice warm and steady. "I just wanted to come by and thank you again for everything." Miss Marple set down her teacup and rose to greet her, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "You're very welcome, my dear, but the one who should be thanked is you. You faced something most people would never dream of confronting, and you came out stronger for it." Evelyn shook her head, her smile tinged with gratitude. "I never would have been able to do it without you. I kept telling myself that I wasn't capable of standing up to Gregory, that I couldn't fight against someone like him, but you showed me that I could. You showed me that I'm stronger than I ever knew." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet pride. "Strength comes from within, Evelyn. Sometimes it just takes someone else to help you see it. But you did the hard part. You faced your fear and moved forward. Now, you can leave all of that behind and focus on your future." Evelyn nodded, her eyes softening with emotion. "I've decided to sell the mill," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's time to move on, to create something new. I'm going to focus on the cafe, on making it the place I always dreamed of. I think it's the right step for me. Miss Marple smiled, her heart swelling with pride for the young woman who had blossomed before her eyes. I think that's a very wise decision, Evelyn. The cafe is your future now. It's a place for people to gather to share in your strength and warmth. You've built something beautiful here, and it's only gonna grow. Evelyn's eyes brightened at the compliment, and she took a deep breath. Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't think I'll ever be able to fully repay you for everything you've done for me, but I'll always be grateful. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's arm. No need for repayment, my dear. The greatest reward is seeing you move forward, seeing you find your way. That's enough for me. As Evelyn left the cottage that afternoon, her steps lighter than they had ever been, Miss Marple returned to her chair by the window. The village, so quiet and peaceful, seemed to reflect the calm that had settled in her heart. She had solved the mystery, helped a woman reclaim her life, and now, there was nothing left to do but wait for the next case to find its way to her. But as Miss Marple sat there, looking out at the village, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The storm had passed, the shadows had been chased away, and the sun was shining once more. Life in St. Mary Mead would return to its quiet, predictable rhythm. And for now, that was enough. The following week, as Miss Marple made her way through the village square, she was greeted with warm smiles from the villagers. Life had resumed its normal pace, the threat of Gregory's return long gone. But the sense of peace felt different now, more genuine than before. Evelyn was free. The legacy of the Thorn family had been put to rest, and the villagers could move forward without fear. As Miss Marple paused near the village church, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Inspector Craddock, his face a picture of respect. Miss Marple, he said with a nod, his tone warm, I just wanted to thank you again for all your help. We wouldn't have gotten to the bottom of this without you. You were right about Gregory from the very start. Miss Marple smiled kindly, though her eyes twinkled with a characteristic sharpness. It was a pleasure, Inspector. I'm just glad it's all over. Gregory won't be troubling anyone else for a long time. Craddock chuckled, his smile genuine. I certainly hope not. But I must say, Miss Marple, you do have an uncanny knack for seeing through people's facades. There's no doubt about it. You've earned your place as the village's unofficial detective. Miss Marple chuckled softly, her eyes glinting with quiet amusement. I don't consider myself a detective, Inspector. Just someone who enjoys a good puzzle. Craddock shook his head, clearly impressed. Well, you've certainly earned a reputation around here. I don't think there's anyone in the village who wouldn't agree. As Miss Marple walked back to her cottage, the sun now beginning its descent into the horizon, she felt a sense of deep satisfaction. The mystery had been solved, the villain had been exposed, and the peace that had been disrupted was now restored. The world seemed right again, and Miss Marple knew that, at least for the moment, saint. Mary Mead was safe. She had done her part. And with that thought, she closed the door to her cottage, ready to enjoy a quiet evening, her mind already shifting toward the next case, the next mystery waiting to be solved. But for tonight at least, there was nothing left to unravel. The story had come to an end. The resolution was complete, and Miss Marple could rest easy, knowing she had once again brought peace to her little corner of the world, and that, in her quiet, unassuming way, was enough. Chapter 13. The Aftermath Saint. Mary Mead had returned to its usual rhythm, peaceful, unhurried, and untroubled by the events that had gripped it only a short time ago. The cafe was thriving, the villagers were once again going about their daily business, and the air seemed lighter, as though the very soil beneath the cobbled streets had been cleansed. Even the old mill, now devoid of its ominous presence, seemed to breathe easier, its creaking timbers no longer echoing with the weight of secrets. Miss Marple sat at her desk, a small pile of letters before her, her spectacles resting delicately on her nose as she flicked through the pages with methodical care. Though it had been a few weeks since Gregory's arrest, the village was still abuzz with quiet gratitude. Evelyn had settled into her new life, the weight of her father's hidden past finally lifted from her shoulders. The cafe, once a symbol of her uncertainty, had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of its owner. And for Miss Marple, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that another chapter of the village's history had closed, its story told, and its wrongs righted. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Miss Marple found herself on a familiar path, making her way to Evelyn's cafe. The cool autumn air stirred the fallen leaves around her, the orange and gold hues, a perfect reflection of the season's change. It was a time of renewal, not just for the village but for Evelyn herself. When she entered the cafe, the warmth wrapped around her, and the familiar sounds of soft laughter and the clink of cups filled the air. Evelyn was behind the counter, her face glowing with a quiet sense of pride. It had been months since Miss Marple had first met her, and the difference in her demeanor was striking. Gone was the nervousness, the fear, the uncertainty. In her place stood a confident, determined woman who had reclaimed her life. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," Evelyn said warmly, her smile as bright as the sun streaming through the windows. "I was wondering when you'd stop by. I've been meaning to thank you again for everything." Miss Marple smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "You're welcome, my dear. It's been a pleasure to watch you grow stronger. But now it seems you're the one who has built something new, something wonderful." Evelyn's eyes softened as she set down the cup she had been holding. "I've been thinking about that a lot. This cafe, it's become more than just a place to make a living. It's a part of me now, a reflection of the person I've become. And none of it would have been possible without you." Miss Marple's smile widened, though she said nothing. She had heard similar words many times before from those she had helped. It was always the same. People began to find themselves only after the weight of their past was lifted, and Evelyn had done that with grace and courage. But Miss Marple, ever humble, didn't need praise. "You've done it all, Evelyn. The cafe is a testament to your strength. And now, you can truly move forward," Miss Marple said softly, her gaze steady. Evelyn looked down at her hands, a brief flicker of emotion crossing her face before she spoke again. "I don't think I ever realized how much my father's past held me back. It was like a shadow I couldn't escape. But now that it's gone, I can finally breathe. I'm not just running a cafe anymore, I'm building a future." Miss Marple nodded, pleased by the change she had witnessed in Evelyn. "That's the true gift, isn't it? The ability to create something new from what you've learned. You've not only inherited a legacy, you've turned it into your own." As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple lingered in the cafe, enjoying the quiet hum of conversation around her. She observed Evelyn as she worked, her movements confident, her laughter genuine. It was as though a weight had been lifted from both the cafe and the young woman who now owned it. The shadow of Gregory was gone, his manipulations unraveled and laid bare, and in his place stood the promise of a new beginning for Evelyn. And yet, as Miss Marple sat back in her chair, A small part of her still wondered. There were always lingering questions, things that only time would answer. Though the case had been resolved, the ripples of Gregory's actions would continue to be felt for a while longer. But Miss Marple was content, for she knew that the right path had been taken. And for now, that was enough. A few days later, as Miss Marple walked back to her cottage after another afternoon spent in the village, her thoughts were light. She had done her part, helping Evelyn, uncovering the secrets of the Thorn family, and seeing justice served. The village was quiet again, and the air felt clean, as though a storm had passed and left only clarity in its wake. But Miss Marple was always aware of the unspoken. She had lived long enough to know that even in the calmest of times, the world still held its mysteries, waiting quietly just beneath the surface. She smiled to herself as she walked through the village square, the familiar sounds of life surrounding her. There was something comforting in knowing that, no matter what came next, she would be ready. She had a talent for seeing things others couldn't or wouldn't. And she knew that life, as it always did, would present another challenge soon enough. For now, though, Miss Marple felt the satisfaction of a job well done. The mystery had been solved, the villain exposed, and the peace restored. The shadows had been chased away, and the truth had triumphed once again. As she reached her cottage, Miss Marple paused for a moment, looking out at the village one last time. The world was quieter now, and for once, it felt like everything was in its rightful place. She turned the key in the door, stepping inside with the quiet knowledge that this chapter of her life had come to a close. But others would follow. There would always be more mysteries to solve, more lives to untangle. And when they came, Miss Marple would be ready. For now, however, the village could rest, and so could she.